And coming to join in with us. So for the first Rebel Talks, just a little introduction is coming in a second, but we are in the Victoria studio, just giving you a nice little podcast. So it's obviously October 2020, Black History Month. The first Rebel Talks aligned with Black History Month, which is going to be talking about, a little divisive topic, what is racism today. So give a little introduction. So obviously for those of you that don't know me, my name's Saul, trainer over here at One Rebel, also look after the studios, and we've got...
I'm Vicky. I am a studio coordinator at One Rebel. I'm also a ride and reshape trainer. And we have...
I'm Tash, and I'm a trainer here as well at One Rebel.
We have also disinfected our hands, so don't worry about the passing of the mics. So again, thank you for coming in. So no COVID. We're COVID secure over here. Right, so... where to kick this off? So we've done a little introduction. To kind of give you an overview of what we're going to talk about is we've got a loose thread of where we want to go with this. However, it's a conversation at the end of the day, so we don't really know where it could end up. But I suppose the key part to start this off at is sort of racism, the death of George Floyd, and why now would be a good place to kind of start this. So... who were to open up the floor? Yeah.
I mean, I feel like the death of George Floyd really thrust racism into the forefront of people's minds. So as soon as he died, I mean, there's been several horrific police brutality videos that have come out over the last, say, 5 years since smartphones have become more prevalent. But this one, I think, because we were all in lockdown, we were all stuck in our houses, and I think it all gave us a moment to be like, oh my God, okay, I can't go to work and escape this, or I have to sit and I have to think, and all I have is social media. Yeah. And that was all anyone was talking about. It was, don't know about you guys, it was a weird moment for me, because it was the first time I've been able to speak about racism out loud in front of people, which is really weird, because I talk about it in my little my black friends or friends that I know online, but I've never spoken about it widely with white friends. How about you, Saul?
Yeah, exactly the same. I think it's kind of a point that we've touched on in discussions internally as a company and within book club, that as a black man, as a non-white person, you deal with these issues of race and you normalize it and you sweep it under the carpet, and it becomes your day-to-day, and you get so used to dealing with it that you just kind of bat it away. That not that it's a non-issue, but you learn how to navigate it is probably the best way to do it. And I think, like you just said, Vicky, that with us being forced into a period of lockdown, that you had no choice but to reflect and look at systemic issues and injustice that is going on worldwide, and that moment of reflection has kind of sparked huge public outrage, and it's now kind of at a point where what do you do with this momentum is kind of where it's at. It's forced people to have a moment of reflection and understanding and learning is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think as you touched on, Saul, we've spoken a lot about the conversation around race, that it's something that it's totally normal for you. It's normalized for you to speak about, but as a white person, as white people, we don't often have those conversations, and I think largely that's pertinent. That's because it's not pertinent to our experience. So it's not conversations that we have. It's not one of the conversations we have to have with our children, for example. It's something that we've spoken about. And I think knowing how to have that dialogue in the first place, and there's a lot of fear around that from everyone. We communicate about all sorts of things, and it's so much at the forefront, more so at the forefront of your experience than my experience, and that's privilege, but we don't necessarily have that dialogue as easily. And why? I
think we all came to that understanding. I think we were all firstly, from my own personal experience, confronted with feeling empowered to having conversations about race for like the first proper time with people and people being willing to listen to those conversations, while as uncomfortable as it was for them and for me included, but it felt like there was an open dialogue about that.
Pammy, who's watching, just said it's part of your life every day if you're black, and I think that's it's exactly it, isn't it? Is that it's not, and that's not just not right, but it's not right for that not to be part of my awareness just because it's not directly. And I think it's recognising that it doesn't matter whether that's intentional or it's not intentional, because the damage is the same. The damage of not being an ally is the same.
Yeah, definitely.
That you know, it's kind of the situation of like, if somebody tells you you've hurt them, you don't get to decide whether you think you have or not, and you don't get to decide whether their experience is valid or not.
Yeah.
And that is the point that we have to start that conversation at.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
Otherwise you're then, it's your voice and your opinion that becomes the conversation, and particularly as someone who is white, that isn't what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, it is about your experience.
How did you find it, Vicky, in terms of like being confronted with having to have conversations about race?
It was really interesting because on a personal level, I grew up around 99% white people. My dad is white, and my mum thinks it's very impolite to speak about race. So growing up, it was always like, oh, why does this happen to me? And then my mum would be like, we don't talk about it. So it was swept under the rug like my whole life, just on a personal level. But when people started talking about it after the George Floyd situation happened, and I came onto those Zoom calls. I was going to say came into work. None of us are at work.
Yeah.
Came onto the Zoom calls, and I was like, oh my gosh, my peers are talking about it, and my peers are understanding. So it was really overwhelming. Did you find it overwhelming as well?
Yeah, I found it overwhelming. It's a lot of emotions kind of rolled into one. I found it overwhelming. I found it like enlightening as well, but I also found it draining in a lot of ways. It was a lot.
There was a sudden influx of messages from almost everyone I know, just saying I'm sorry and I didn't know, and I didn't expect anyone to apologise, because I also think another issue is that there's a lot of around white privilege. There's also a lot of white guilt.
Yeah.
And what people need to realise is that it's not a personal thing, and it's nothing to do with each individual person being racist. It's about a systemic issue that we have, and how we navigate that systemic issue, and what we do about it, and how we talk to each other. And the fact is, like, the more we talk about it, the more we're able to solve problems. But yeah, I think that's been really difficult as well, dealing with the tears and the guilt, and trying to explain that it is not an individual problem.
I think that's a big thing that we've all found in terms of like having those difficult conversations, is understanding that, you know, being part of a system that, you know, a structural and systemic issue of racism doesn't make you a bad person as an individual, but that's still, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you can be complicit in that system and benefit from it. And recognizing and understanding that is like just the first hurdle to get over. And then once you get over that hurdle, it's like, right, okay, I understand there's a problem, but what am I on an individual level and as a group going to now do about it? Yeah,
exactly. It's almost like, to use an analogy, if someone is, say, bullied in the playground, and you have the popular kids, it's the popular kids' duty to protect the kids who are getting bullied, because the kids who are getting bullied do not have the power. The issue is that black and brown people in this country don't have power, and privilege needs to be used to protect black and brown people in this country. It's I think that's an easy way to explain it, but
it's like, thank you. It's also this isn't a fully formed thought, as you can tell.
Go for it, Tash. Yeah.
But you know, as you say, like that communication that people have. I think obviously at any point you have the realization that you have not been showing up for your friends and your loved ones like you should have been, and ignorance is not an excuse for that. Is initially, because that's a complicated thing to process, particularly if you see yourself as a good person, as an open-minded person. It's we don't often find ourselves in those situations, and so then we maybe don't start from the point of how what we're saying is received. It's like what you are feeling, and you don't think.
You start from defensiveness, don't you? In that situation, yeah.
And I think I've like talked myself into a corner now, because like you said something that made me think that, and now I can't remember what on earth it was, but I think
It's using privilege.
yes. So and I think unless we recognise that's where the action happens, is to utilise that, because the guilt may or may not happen. It's not really about that, and it's not anyone else's problem to fix that. That's what you sit with, and then what do you do? Because ultimately, that's everything, isn't it? You first, like, you have to acknowledge and validate the problem and the hurt of the people around you, and then secondly, how do you change things? And I think looking at using your privilege, amplification.
I think like that's that's touching on like some stuff that we discussed before we came on this, like the idea of like conversations about race are really uncomfortable. Like they are uncomfortable. They shouldn't be, but obviously they are. And there's a very British brand of racism that's very subtle and insidious within society, but there's like a big disconnect between what we see in America and what we experience here in Britain. So like, because racism in America is a lot more overt and in your face, it's easier to process and easier to digest, whereas here it's like, you know, it's different subtle ways in terms of like microaggressions, or it's in media portrayal, or it's not as blatant as the way it's in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not as blatant in sometimes in the way that it can come across. So there's a very British sense of detachment from it, of just being like, oh, that doesn't happen here. It's only an American problem. So, you know, it's not something that we have to deal with. It's comfortable, yeah.
Yeah, that is very British. We do often have to be very comfortable, very polite. Going back to the way my family have handled racism in the past, it's all just like, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about politics. We sweep everything under the rug. And because it's not blatant and it's not overt and it's not Confederate flags and clan hoods and stuff like that, it's walking across the other side from the street when you see a black person, or like not hiring someone, or thinking someone's hair is dirty and all that kind of stuff. It's very like, it is very insidious, as you said, and I was going to say it's worse because it invalidates your experience of it then. Yeah, exactly.
I think as well, that's the dangerous side of it, because it leaves you questioning like your experience. Like and something happens to you, you feel a certain kind of way about it, and then someone questions your experience, which then makes you question yourself.
Yeah, it's the gaslighting.
Yeah.
And it is exhausting to have to explain, no, actually, this is how I feel. And especially if you're not surrounded by people who look like you. Certainly in the fitness industry, we do have that issue. And I've mentioned it a few times in the past. It's been like, that's not a problem because you're here. Like, but I'm the only one here.
Yeah. And then that obviously and then like, tokenism is just it's why it's so dangerous in terms of, you know, like you can't use an individual as a justification for, you know, a whole like race of people, you know. That's not a fair portrayal that, you know, a system is working. Yeah,
one is not enough.
Yeah, it's completely the opposite, in fact. Yeah,
we're not a box to be ticked.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I just think, as you say, like the danger of, it's the but of that, isn't it? Like that we you can do with everything. Yeah, but there is representation. Yes, but it's not enough. Or like, yeah, but people are engaging with something more. Yes, but it's late. Like, you know, and I think that is all a kind of tokenism, I guess, in a way, in that looking at what has happened as a reason for kind of asking for a polite request in terms of what is going to happen. It's like, well, we've had a lot of progress, sure, but there is no, and that's, and at the end of that is someone's day to day. You know, it's not a statistic, although it is very useful to understand where we are like that. The bottom line is, it's not enough, and that not enough is somebody's life that they live tomorrow, the day after. They still like, why do we wait? Why is that a slow process? Like, why is that person less important than something that we consider to be urgent, you know?
It's that idea that, you know, why do we have to debate that, you know, racism is a thing, that, you know, it does exist within our society. And I suppose it comes down to that, you know, for a large percentage of the British population, 86%, according to the census, who are white, it's not their lived experience. And because it's not your lived experience, you don't see it as a problem. So why would you have to confront it?
And it's also that confrontation of seeing yourself as not 100% good. Even though no one is 100% good, no one is 100% bad. There's like a moralistic scale that everyone can be on. It's so complex and it's so deep, but no one likes to think of themselves in a negative way. And all of us are complicit at the moment, even black people. We're all complicit to this system. And it is really hard to look inside yourself and be like, oh my God, I've been a part of that. And British people especially don't like to do that.
Yeah. It's the normalization of it, isn't it? It's the normalization of, like, you know, the day-to-day issues and the day-to-day, like, you know, as from personal experience, like racial microaggressions that you had, you know, an example for anyone that doesn't know what a microaggression is, you know, something like someone saying to me, you're so articulate, or you talk really well, not knowing the loaded nature behind what that actually means. And in terms of, well, I'm actually just a product of my environment, you know, I come from, you know, a Guyanese mother emigrated here when she was 5. My dad was a taxi driver. He's Jamaican. You know, they worked hard. They managed to put me into a good school that I was luckily enough managed to get into, and therefore I was around a lot of people that happen to talk like this. So I'm a product of my environment. But then also on the other side of it, like that term of "you're so articulate," it also loads up that there's only an authentic way to be black. Like, because you don't sound like you're from an estate in Hackney, doesn't means you're not authentically black. And what does that actually mean? Yeah.
I've had exactly the same thing. Yeah. I grew up in Surrey, so my dad's white, my mum's from Ghana. I went to private school for 10, 15 years. So I've been around southern Surrey, people who all went to Oxford and Cambridge. And I've had when I've turned up to a job interview, I didn't realise you'd look like that. So many times. And I've just been like, what did you think I was going to look like? Or people have seen a picture of me and they've said, I didn't think you would sound like that. So there is a loaded nature behind that question, and that is a microaggression. And also things about, like, can I touch your hair is a microaggression. And people touching your hair and going, I didn't realise it was going to be soft. Or I didn't realise it was going to be clean. I'm just like,
it's flip that the other way. Like, if you flip that the other way, being like, you know, someone comes in and you're like, you talk really well. Like, if I said that the other way around someone, in terms of, like, would they take offence to it? Probably, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, I went to grammar school. I grew up in a very white middle class town, and if anyone ever expresses something like that about me, it's not with surprise. There's no surprise. Do you know what I mean? And like, and that it's very easy to marginalise someone else saying that to you until you can look at your own experience. It's because sometimes as a white person, it's the absence of that. It's the absence of that. So it's easy to ignore it because it's not happening. It's like, well, that doesn't happen to me. That doesn't happen to me until you pair it with what your colleagues or your contemporaries' experience is.
Yeah.
You understand what that is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's privilege, but it's also that you don't have to think about that.
Yeah.
Things are just as they're said.
It's like if you've never had the question, you know, where are you from? West London. Where are you from? No, where are you really from? Ealing. Like, what they're trying to get to is, like, where is your racial heritage from? You know? And the loaded nature, again, behind that question in terms of, you know, I would, like, if I asked the question the other way around and they were like, I'm from Middlesbrough, that would be the end of that conversation. I wouldn't then ask a follow-up question being like, where are you really from? Yeah.
That also suggests that you don't belong.
Yeah.
Which is wild because we were born here.
Yes, it is wild, but it goes back to the systemic nature of what we're speaking about, which is it's not that wild because that's what we are educating our kids, because the history of this country is not inclusive of everyone who is British. It's the history that we're taught about this country is a white British history. And so, like, that's so profoundly lacking in the system that we're educated through that, you know, I'm not in any way justifying it, but I'm saying actually it's not surprising that happens. It's more frightening, and that's because it happens across the board, and we endorse it in that we think our education system is balanced. Or our government certainly does. Like, they've been pretty explicit about that.
Yeah.
In response to charities like the Black Curriculum,
Yeah.
approaching that directly and doing the work to actually offer up something that does speak about all of our histories here.
Yeah.
We don't have that. And we're not really in the places where it matters and the change happens. We're not really having an open conversation about it. And so that completely informs the normalisation of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that saying that you don't belong, that's being perpetuated by the story that we tell ourselves about where we come from.
Completely. Like, to put that in some context for anyone that's like, that went over their heads, like, you think back to like history at school, you probably know the rhyme about, you know, Henry VIII's wives, or you learnt about the Tudors, but you didn't learn anything about the Windrush generation or the founding of the NHS, which is more pertinent to your day-to-day life. Yeah. Yeah. Which, you know, and there's a reason behind why you don't learn about that. Yeah.
Because there's a shameful history, and people don't want to, again, going back to people not wanting to seem like bad people and be uncomfortable and come to terms with the fact that British history is full of murder and colonialism. It's like the United Kingdom isn't the beautiful, positive thing that we all were brought up to think it is.
I think that's the big thing that, like, we've had in discussions that, you know, when, like, certain books that we've read, like when we were going through Natives by Carla, great book, by the way, if anyone has Natives by Carla, go and check it out, especially if you're looking at British, like, education and history. When people were presented with the facts, you know, it's like, here's the facts, this is what happened, they get a rounded picture of being like, okay, right, yeah, there were some really bad things that went on. There were some good things, you know. It's not all swayed to the good side. There's a lot of grey in the middle. And actually, you know, I can get a more complete picture as an individual of it, rather than being spoon-fed directly one narrative on it.
100%.
Yeah.
That's it. That was it.
Yeah. Sorry, this two mic thing is really annoying for us. We're trying to work our way around it. We kind of dived in. We've kind of been talking for a while with a lot about that. Yeah, we kind of went in deep with that. I don't really know where to go next, really. We've covered quite a lot in that we can dive into. In terms of like, we've given like personal experiences in terms of like microaggressions that we've had there. Like, can you think of any others that come to mind?
I wrote a piece. This is in lockdown, and I just wrote like a random thing on my Instagram stories, and it was to trade places as the experience. Do you remember? Trade places as the experience of a black girl, because through your life, it's weird because as a woman, your success is driven by looks. And I know that's an awful misogynistic thing to say, but quite a lot of female success comes down to the way you present yourself. Black women aren't given a lot of access to hair, beauty, clothes that fit, anything. Like, I could talk about this for hours. It's not made for us, and there have been times where I've been invited to a wedding and the makeup artist has said, I don't have anything for your face, I don't have anything for your hair. I don't know how to do your hair. I've been in theatre productions where they've said, can you do your own hair and makeup? So I wrote a piece on Instagram stories that was basically switching my experience as a black girl into a white girl and saying, imagine going into a hairdresser and them saying, we can't do your hair, or like, imagine going out with a guy for the first time and them going, I've never been with someone with your skin colour before. It's like weird things like that, and everyone, like, I think I got about 50 messages. I think it was the most messages I've ever gotten on Instagram.
Yeah.
It might be small numbers for you lot with thousands of followers, but people were like, I've never ever thought about any of those things.
Yeah, but those are all like lived experiences that you've had throughout your life that you've then normalized, that conversely to people who are white, who have never had to think about or had to deal with any of those situations at all.
Never. So weird. Even things like skin colour plasters. I don't know if you guys saw when skin colour plasters were brought out in Tesco. When was it? 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago. And so many like black people are like, oh my gosh, like that's amazing, black plasters. I think that's a really cool thing to bring out. And a lot of white people are like, why do we need this? Because they've never had to think like things don't. Then it's not. White people aren't used to things not being made for them.
Yeah, it's like nude coloured tights, isn't it?
Yeah, nude coloured tights, nude coloured anything. Yeah, exactly. So I used to do ballet. Ballet shoes are all pink. So yeah, it's really strange. I think a lot of people open their eyes and they were just like, I've never even realised that everything we consume in like fashion, beauty, and everything like that is made for white people. Which brings me on to I don't know if any of I know we watched it, School Against Racism. Is that the name of the?
It's on Channel 4. The school
that tried to end racism. That's the one. Where there were so many little girls in that room. All the black girls were saying, "Oh, I wish I had white skin." I looked at magazine covers and I wanted to look like the white girls with the blonde hair. And you're fed like Barbie dolls, Bratz dolls, all that kind of thing. They all have pale skin and blonde hair, and that's what our experience is in beauty. We're told it's almost like we're not allowed to be beautiful. So
it's like your beauty is not normalized. It's it's marginalized. It's the opposite. It's it's treated as other. Very much so.
It's a really interesting experience because I think lately we have been able to talk about it, and lately like you can go into a shop and you can find foundation and hair products and things like that for black people for the first time in my whole life.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. Too late.
Yeah. not incredible. Not incredible.
Incredible.
Yeah, but like
Normal.
this is what I mean. Yeah, in terms of like it's incredible because it's just never been a thing before.
Yeah.
But it should be more normal. Yeah. Go for it. Shout them out.
Go. Carry on talking about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The school that tries to end racism, but I'll just say them so that they.
Yeah.
Jess McKee said. I'm just thinking what we were talking about at the time.
So kind of going to the school that tried to end racism, and then
actually before that, just saying the recognition of white privilege means that like the balance needs readjusting, and a lot of white institutions are resistant to give up power, and ignorance is the way to justify that to yourselves. And that was just touching on a conversation we've also had before, is that it requires us, it's not like it will just happen because we think better things.
Yes.
It requires action.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the conversation we just had, like on our way here, being like, if you are ignorant of a problem but you benefit from it, that doesn't make it right. In terms of, and then if you're then made aware of it, that you're benefiting from a problem, you can't continue to ignore it.
Yeah, or if you do, then that is what you're doing.
You're actively choosing. Yeah. You're actively choosing to ignore it.
And the other thing is, which is like a whole conversation, I think, and what I just say it is what's your thoughts on the removal of statues? Which I think the first thing to say about, you say.
We've had a lot of conversations about this, and I think like one of the key points for me is in terms of with statues, I think a lot of them need to be contextualized, because I think the big thing with a statue is whenever automatically when you see a statue, you are led to, you have like a visceral reaction. You're led to believe that that was a great person because they are put physically on a pedestal.
It's glorifying someone.
It's glorifying someone.
It's not history, because we don't take our kids to the statue to teach them about history. We sit in a classroom and we do it. So that argument is, it's not there for that.
Yeah.
It's glorification.
And then like there's a whole wider context in terms of stuff that we could dive into with it. But I think with a lot of statues, that if you were given the whole picture, you know, of the situation, and the statue, you walk past the statue, it was contextualized. Like, you know, if you look at the Edward Colston statue in Bristol, you know, it didn't say he was a slave trader. And there had been multiple petitions for years about that statue, trying to get that removed, to no avail. So when, you know, race exploded into public consciousness, this was a physical reaction to a lack of action after years of campaigning.
Yeah. There's a difference between like acknowledging something and celebrating it.
Yes.
Of course, we need history. Like, history is profoundly important. That's
we need to learn from history. That's it. Yeah.
But to celebrate it is a totally different thing, and I think it's uncomfortable for the same reason that it's uncomfortable to look at what you benefit from, because at any point where your reality is questioned, it is deeply uncomfortable. And that's what that is. It's like you have to question what you are taught, and you think about some of those people who are being glorified. So be it. Like, what is worse? What is worse is for someone who, had that person been alive today, would directly have been oppressed by, have to walk past that all the time, and also know that there are people, and actually this is a point that State of Mind has made, is that we need more black statues. And what do you want to celebrate? Because there's far more to celebrate there than there is to hang on to that, because we're keeping the status quo, and it's distracting as well, I think, is the other thing. It's like it's a easily distracting conversation away from actually the bones of what we're talking about.
I think that point there in terms of like, you know, celebrating excellence, celebrating black excellence, celebrating non-white excellence is like a lot to delve into, because if you kind of take a step back and you look at successful black figures, specifically, overwhelmingly they will be musicians, they will be sports personalities, or they will be entertainers. You do not hear about black scholars, you do not hear about black professors, black scientists. You don't hear about it. Like, you know, you wouldn't be able to name, like, generally, if you ask people a question, to name a black scientist, bar someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, they wouldn't be able to name another one. And why is that? Because it's not celebrated, it's not talked about.
That's very true. It's not talked about. I also think the statue situation was a strange one, because it was a massive distraction from what was happening. Massive distraction. And I think the media obviously wanted to demonize what was happening. And that was such a tiny fraction of time in the whole time that was spent protesting across the country, across Europe, across America, and that one tiny incident that happened with how many people? 12 people, if that. And that was highlighted. That turned the conversation into something completely different and completely irrelevant. But I do agree we need to.
Go, Tash.
Just
Yeah.
thinking about like the disparity in media portrayal.
Yeah.
A really, really easy example is how disappointing it was to watch the coverage of the anti-BLM march that happened.
Yeah.
And how collectively little outrage there was about that.
Yeah.
Because I think there are things that are happening politically in this country that we have a deep-seated fear that there are a lot of voices like that.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that, like, for example, unless I choose to do something, then I'm also represented by those people, is frightening. And of course it is, like, and it's all right for that to be the case, just depending on what you do about it. Like, it is frightening, it's disappointing, it doesn't make you feel hopeful. But, and this is a broader problem that you're probably better to speak about than I am, but just talking about media portrayal and and how unbalanced that is.
It's just, I think the key takeaway is, if it's not balanced. That's the thing. Like we kind of touched on there, in terms of, if you look at figures of black excellence, it's always within a very specific genre or sport, and then there is a disproportionate representation with blackness and violence in media portrayal, even though it is if you look at the crime statistics, like, as a whole, it's a significantly smaller proportion than the media would lead you to believe. Yeah, and it's disproportionately reported.
Yeah.
Massively.
Than you've written about.
Yeah, and there's actually a blog piece, in terms of, if you've got time, on Rebel Speed, to go and look at that. You can look at the crime statistics and go through that, and you can look at disproportionate rates of stop and search. You can look at disproportionate rates of the criminal justice system. There's a really interesting link to a great website I would advise any of you to go and look at, called The Colour of Power, which is an index of like the top 1,100 most powerful jobs in the country, of which I think it's 53 out of like 1,099 are held by people of black, Asian, or minority ethnic other backgrounds. And if you scroll through it, it's shocking actually to see. So yeah, something you can go and see. But yeah, going back to media portrayal, it's like, it's just disproportionate at the end of the day.
And I also think Akala touched on this a little bit in, I think it was both his book and he's spoken about it on television. When we think about black violence and stabbings and crime in general, black on black violence, as some people call it, the common denominator they come up with is that these people have black skin. That's the only common denominator. They don't come up with the fact that the people that happen to be in those situations live in impoverished backgrounds, and they have limited access to education, and children live in poorer areas that have more gang violence. They just so happen to have black skin. But what happens to the media reporting black excellence, as we can go back to that point as well. African children are some of the youngest people to go into Oxford, Cambridge, Bristol Uni. Some of them have absolutely incredible grades, but it's never spoken about.
Mm.
Not as a trend, but as a trend, and I mean trend in the way that we speak about black on black crime as a trend, like as something that is in existence as a pattern.
Yeah.
Why is that the pattern we focus on?
Yeah.
Not that pattern, for example, as you say, Vicky.
Which, going back to the other side, it's like, look at the stats. Like there's a government website that looks at crime racial figures. It's not a hidden website. It's a public website that clearly displays like a racialized pattern, but that white on white crime, which is the overwhelming proportion of crime throughout the UK as a whole, is not talked about. Yeah.
It's just called crime.
Yeah, it's just called crime. Yeah.
Question.
Go.
or just something also that Jess has asked, and this touched on a conversation that we've had, maybe after reading British, and like something that that Afua Hirsch spoke about two sort of things, like fetishism and also appropriation. So what Jess has said is, you talked about black beauty being marginalised, but is there also a case of it being fetishised? Like sometimes fetishism is mistaken for being anti-racist.
Yeah, I think I think very much so, in a male sense. I feel like fetishism, like in terms of racial fetishism, for black females is marginalised.
Yeah.
But for males is fetishized, like in terms of like black men are seen as desirable, and like you know they're the tropes and the stigmas that go along with that, you know.
Yeah, like the Kardashians, all like it's seen as almost like a fashion accessory.
Yeah.
To date black men, and then black women are marginalized for having certain features, which then years later white women will then steal, and it's only acceptable when it's on a white or a lighter skinned face. I mean, personally, as a mixed race person, I know that I do have privilege, and I know that I am light skinned, and I know that I have absolutely nowhere near the experience of someone who is a dark skinned black woman.
And the same for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's that I don't know that experience, so I can only talk from my own. But we commodify things like having curvier bodies now, having full lips, tan skin, braided hair, like all these things that when you're at school, say braided hair for example, is something that's like a staple hairstyle for a little black girl to keep her hair neat. But that's the hairstyle that gets banned by school because it's seen as a fashion accessory or distracting. And it is like very irritating to see things that, I mean, personally, being bullied at school for having darker skin, for being a bit curvier and stuff, and then suddenly you see it all over the magazines and you see people injecting themselves with chicken fat, and you're like, but how come it's okay on you?
Yeah.
It's
why is it now desirable?
Yeah, why is it now desirable? What happened? I guess the Kardashians happened, but like trends change all the time. Like the desirable body shapes change all the time, but black women do have it time and time again, where things that they create are then only acceptable when brought onto the forefront by white women. Like hair extensions, big earrings, lots of gold jewelry, long nails. Long nails for the longest time was completely unacceptable in workplaces. It was always seen as like ghetto and trashy. Now it's something that you can go and get your nails done for £100 at somewhere in Mayfair, and like it's absolutely insane to me that only like 20 years ago it was just not okay for someone to have long nails or big gold jewelry. It is very confusing. It is quite irritating.
And I guess that's the difference between how you intend something and how something affects someone else, and that's kind of the fundamental of that conversation. Are you listening to what someone else is saying to you about it, or are you saying, yeah, but I'm showing appreciation for that? Oh yeah, but isn't that what we're working towards? That might be your intention, but if what is being fed back to you is actually, when I do it, it's not okay, and that's like that. It's unjust for starters, but on like a personal level, it must be very upsetting and marginalised. That your response to that is marginalised.
It's quite jarring. I remember, this isn't a black issue. This is moving more onto the Asian community.
Go, hit it.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, bindis became very popular. People would wear them to festivals. People would wear all types of things to festivals, really. Native American, headdresses, which were swiped from their culture years ago. Same with bindies. You can't wear a bindi outside because someone could brick you. Like that is someone's reality.
Yeah.
Someone walking down the street wearing a bindi or a red dot on their head could get attacked for that very reason. And so white girl buys a bindi from Claire's Accessories and then goes to Glastonbury. That's insulting. It's insulting to an entire culture. So I think appropriation, I know it seems like a buzzword and people do think that people are being snowflakes, being too sensitive about it, but it really does affect whole cultures of people.
Yeah, massively.
Yeah.
I think with cultural appropriation is who is benefiting from it behind it, who's commodifying it and benefiting from it, and then deciding that they can then make financial gain from it. I think that sometimes you've got to ask yourself that question, like behind it. Why was it unacceptable 10 years ago, but now it's desirable that it's okay for it to happen?
I wonder why.
Is it education? Is part of that education? And I don't just mean that in a kind of standardised way. I mean that in the way of discussion as well, and educating ourselves as adults, knowing that what we all collectively learn is not the full story. How then do you inform your choices?
But I think that's a key point, though. I think that it takes a lot of self-awareness to get to that point of understanding that what you've been taught isn't the full story, because I think a lot of people fundamentally believe what they've been taught is the full whole picture.
Like we believe the law and the application of it
is fair.
Is fair.
Yeah.
That gives us security to believe that framework and that structure is just, and so we don't like to look at it.
Yeah.
I wanted
Even more so when you look at the representation.
Yeah.
Because that's numbers, that's not percentages. And then when we look at how we are represented, then it's actually even worse than that.
Yeah. And then if you look at the further figures behind that into how many of those stop and searches lead into arrests, it's nominal, really nominal. Yeah. So it's showing a racialized policy in terms of discrimination to search people that is then not turning into any form of action on top of it. So clearly it's a broken policy that's not working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all that happens is that when you see someone getting stop and searched, as someone who grows up and believes that the law is morally correct, you walk past a stop and search happening and your immediate thought is, what did they do wrong?
Yeah.
And if you keep seeing black children being searched, I mean, I've been guilty of it. If I see someone, I mean, not recently, of course, but like in the past, I'd see someone getting searched by the police or someone being spoken to by the police, and you immediately think, what have they done?
Yeah. First time I got stopped and searched, I was like 15. It was in the middle of Notting Hill Gate tube station, going to Carnival, in the middle of the station where people are getting out of. They didn't pull me into the side and pull me into like a separate room with hundreds of people walking past.
That must have been
Hundreds
so
of people walking
embarrassing.
past. Yeah.
Yeah.
By myself and three police officers. You know, a 15-year-old kid.
And it's like, why would they need so many?
Why would they need so many police officers? You know, why would they not see that, you know, I'm a minor, I was under the age of 16, why would they not pull me aside? You know, why would you do that in the middle of a tube station? There's so many whys behind the question, but you know, then those kind of experiences leave trauma and like leave scars.
Yeah, and it leaves distrust
Exactly.
with
Yeah.
the police,
Well, yeah.
which is really sad.
It's like you say when things are not made for you, and that's the same there. Like, it's you're asking the application of the law and the fundamentals of the law don't protect us in the same way, but you're expected to trust that. Like, and I don't know if we've spoken about this or I've read it and I can't actually think where, but you know, speaking about a reluctance to engage, like then you don't have a protector if you need help, but you don't. There's no evidence to suggest that support is going to be there for you. Then that is so perpetuating that situation, because we don't always have. Yeah, we just don't have support. You don't have support.
Yeah.
No. And it leaves you feeling drained. I mean, I personally, I don't have that experience. I see it around me, but I know as someone who has quite a lot of privilege myself, I know that I am not a threat to police officers. I know that, I mean, the maximum I've ever felt is being dressed head to toe in Nike with my hood up, going into a shop and then being followed.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's because I'm black or because I'm dressed head to toe in Nike with my hood up.
Yeah,
I
but
had
you
to
have to
ask
ask
that
that
question.
question. That's
Yeah,
the
that's
thing.
true.
That's the thing about it, is you have to ask that question. Is yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You like, if you were walking into a shop dressed head to toe in black Nike, like you have the thought of like, oh, they could think that I might be stealing something or that I'm a criminal. Do you know? Do you know? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean by that?
What's the
Yeah.
like damage of that, personal damage of that
Yeah.
over time?
Yeah. Exactly. Whereas, you know, the other way round, is that the same case? You know, if if I if I walk down the street wearing a black Nike tracksuit, which I own, I know I have a higher likelihood that if I get stopped by the police or I'm driving a car and I'm wearing that, there is a higher likelihood that I will be pulled over and stopped by the police.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I think what is insulting is there is a lot. It's a lot of gaslighting. I guess it comes back to the same point. For there's an interview where I think Cressida Dick said, "Yeah, we don't think there's an institutionalized problem in the police.
Yeah.
That we have decided to make that statement that we don't think." And then that's the tangible thing of, well, what can you not look at that? And Izzy has said it's racial profiling.
Yeah.
It's racial profiling.
Completely.
And as you say, Saul, what's more insulting is those figures are not an independent study; they're a government study.
Yeah.
So presumably that's what is being taken into account with legislation. Is it not? Like, what else do you use? So then that's deliberate ignorance, because the evidence is there to kind of actually make better choices about how you serve everyone.
Right. So like on that point, so if you look at, I've just got the stats. So in London, black people were 12 times more likely to be stopped compared with 4 times the previous year. Combined figures for England and Wales show black people were 40 times more likely to be stopped, up from 14 times in 2017. When the ethnic makeup of the city is calculated, it means that a black person was 11.8 times more likely to be targeted. Even more alarming is that young black men were stopped and searched by police more than 20,000 times in London during lockdown, the equivalent of more than a quarter of all 15 to 24-year-olds in the capital. The figures show that only 21% of stop and searches led to arrests, fines, drugs, warnings, or cautions. So you're working with a policy that has an 80% failure rate. In what other line of, roughly 79%, but in what other line of business would you be able to carry on with a policy like that? It's clearly not working in the way that you expect it to be working.
And it is business.
Yeah.
It's business because there is investment involved. it's a public service. We pay for it, so it is business. That, as you say, and we wouldn't accept that in any other model, and that's one that's supposed to serve us collectively, you know, in the most important way imaginable, really.
It's supposed to protect us all. It's only protecting one demographic of people, because I guess it's not only a race problem, there's a class problem as well.
Yeah, I think whenever you talk about race and class is like, you know, highly interlinked in terms of just wherever you're going to go with it.
Will we get kicked off at an hour?
I don't know how much we've been rattling on for.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like potentially we could be 3 to 4 minutes
Away.
But I could be wrong.
I don't know. Well, maybe then it might be a good time to wrap it up, because we could probably talk for hours. But in terms of, are there any questions on there? Has anyone come up with anything?
Yeah, guys, ask your questions.
Yeah.
Ask them now. So there's like conversations. Pete has asked. He said he thinks there should be more vulnerable talks.
More.
Yeah, great.
Good.
Talking about focusing, and I think this is a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
But focusing on inclusion in fitness. Is
Yeah.
fitness a privilege? How do we make gyms a more friendly environment?
Yeah.
And I think now, there's so much. There's so much to speak about on that. That's like another chat.
I think we'd love to be able to do a talk on that. I think the idea behind this one was, you know, we didn't really know where it would end up. We had a lot that we wanted to talk about, and maybe just give people, like, you know, try and ground it in personal experience was a good place to start it. So I think specifically looking at fitness, we are a fitness company.
Yeah.
We work in a fitness company. And something that as a company we're trying to work towards. We hope we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
We know it's a long journey. So yeah, definitely I think that'd be a great thing to dive into.
And another quick one from Jessie P. Would you mind discussing the tone deaf All Lives Matter response to Black Lives Matter? Because we had quite a lot of chats about how to respond to that, or how we were responding to that when we were speaking a lot over lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, where to start with it. It's like, you know, all lives don't matter until Black Lives Matter equally, you know. Your friend's fallen over and broken their leg and they're in pain. You turning around saying to them, well, I have legs too, you know, or my legs hurt too, doesn't help the situation, does it? You know, you're seeing hundreds of memes going around like that, but
it's still not sinking in.
No.
It's almost like it's a defensive response, because no one says that about literally any other situation. You can talk about specific types of cancer. You can speak about specific charities. There's mental health issues, but people will be like, yeah, but I've got health issues.
Yeah.
Or like, but we never question anything else. Save the whales. People don't say, we'll save all the fish. Like, people don't do that. Like, we just accept it. So
you accept them as their own individual issues, don't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think people, like, going back to white people are not used to not being included, and again seeing things as a very personal attack. So I think when people say Black Lives Matter, they're like, oh, I'm not involved in that.
Yeah.
Like, I've never not been involved in things. All lives matter. But when the people who use that response, if there's an issue with refugees, so there was this horrible situation in the Channel yesterday. I don't know if you guys knew about it. Quite a lot of people died travelling. And where are the All Lives Matter people then? Where are they when you've got children in the UK who are starving at the moment? Like,
I think it's a context thing, and it's like understanding between the context,
100%.
isn't it? In terms of, like, you know, the statement like Black Lives Matter is saying Black Lives Matter equally, you know, and it's the equality. It's not a case of Black Lives Matter more,
or only Black Lives Matter,
or only Black Lives Matter. And like, you know, I think a big, like, key point is, like, being, like, pro-black does not mean anti-whiteness. It's a movement for equality.
I think people get confused as well, because in the past, pro-white movements have been anti-black.
Yeah.
So I think people hear pro-black and think automatically it's anti-white, when that's not the case at all. I mean, I also read something the other day saying that I think some white people might be afraid that what black people want is revenge, when actually they just want equality. You just want the same things for everyone, the same human rights. We do not revenge.
That balance, it doesn't look like that to you.
Yeah, 100% precisely.
Another question, which Pete has asked, which I think again is like maybe there's a short answer to this, and we touched on it another time. But do you feel there's racism in the fitness industry? Which I don't think is there's not much ambiguity around that.
Yeah, there.
Big question.
I think you just got to look around the fitness industry in terms of looking at it. It's not specific. Firstly, it's not specific to the fitness industry.
No.
It's reflective of all industries, but there is a much smaller demographic of black or Asian, or a different minority, of non-white specifically trainers, comparatively. But there's a lot behind that in terms of, there's a big lack of access to fitness. There are barriers into fitness, that are created for non-white people. Some of them are self-inflicted, but yes, in short, yes, there is racism in the fitness industry, definitely.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love for this to be a more.
This could be a whole
inclusive
talk on
space.
itself. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I could talk
yeah.
about this for hours.
Yeah.
We probably should.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we should have another talk specifically
Definitely.
about fitness. But yeah, I think we're working on
Yeah.
creating a more inclusive and diverse atmosphere in this company, at least.
Yeah, I think
doing what we can.
what we kind of talked about is it's chicken and egg. If we have more diverse trainers, we hope that will encourage a more diverse customer demographic to come through our door. We
100%.
hope it's that way around. Like that's what we believe. I think we all believe if we have more diverse trainers, more people will see themselves represented in fitness industry. Therefore, they're more likely to come through those doors and
Yeah.
experience fitness. Like,
So I think did I speak to you about this, Saul? I think I spoke to both of you actually. Someone mentioned that if they were to go into an all black gym with all black trainers, would they walk into the door and not think I don't want to be here? They'd probably think a bit like, oh, okay, I look different. I feel different. And I think possibly, given that London is one of the most multicultural cities in the world, our fitness industry doesn't reflect that at all. So it doesn't surprise me that we don't have a very diverse client base at the moment.
as diverse as we would like it more. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, we're working on it.
Yeah, but as you say, it's across the board because it's not just in one place. It's where you can see yourself represented is obviously where we want to be, and that's not to say that we can't be inspired by people who are different to us, of course, but that's not exclusive. At the moment that's exclusive, so it's easy to say, yeah, but I am inspired by someone who doesn't. I like to take class with someone who doesn't look like me, but A, not everyone is that human, and B, we can very clearly see that there's not an inclusive environment, and I think actually in fitness that is a wider conversation that race is a part of, and I think the most present part of that, but it extends to accessibility and inclusivity in a kind of wider conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Should we do one more if there's another question? I think that might be a good place. That might be it to wrap it up for today.
I think so.
Sweet.
That's all.
I think that's it for now then, team.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for listening.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. We've rattled on for an hour and a bit, so hopefully it was interesting. You learned something. So, obviously that first one, so first Rebel Talks was pretty general in terms of looking at what is racism, personal experience, and kind of tying it all back into that. But I think for the next one, it's just going to be a case of hopefully, I think that idea and Pete's throwing them out there is looking at something a bit more specifically fitness related, because I know that's something we could all speak about for ages.
I think definitely DM us if there's something that you're very
Yeah.
specifically interested in listening to us speak about.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
Amazing.
helpful.
But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vicky and Tash, for coming down. Yeah, next time we'll get a proper mic sorted so that we'll be able to do this properly. But every single one of you that checks in, thank you for doing that. Thank you for the guys here staying late. So Matt and Dan, and we will catch you at the next one very, very soon. All right. Bye everyone. See you later. Take care.